I grew up in a neighborhood with lots of different types of people, a lot of different nationalities, and I always enjoyed the differences. It was not a bad thing. People didn't take themselves that.
For more than half a century, Clint Eastwood has been the face of American cinema. The quiet cowboy, the tough detective, the man who didn't need words to command a scene. From the dusty plains of the good, the bad, and the ugly to the tense streets of Dirty Harry, he shaped an era, built an empire, and defined masculinity for generations. But now, as time catches up with the Hollywood icon, his story is turning from legend to legacy, and that legacy has left his family in tears. At 95 years old, Eastwood's life is a portrait of triumph, loss, and endurance. He has built a fortune worth hundreds of millions through decades of acting, directing, and producing, a legacy that few in Hollywood can rival. But for his family, that fortune represents something far deeper, the cost of a life lived for art, not ease. The man who gave the world unforgettable stories often kept his own heart guarded, leaving behind a complex web of love, silence, and reflection. Behind the camera, Eastwood was never just a filmmaker. He was a craftsman obsessed with legacy. And now, as his estate and his life's work come under reflection, the people closest to him can't help but feel the weight of it all. Not just the money, not the awards, but the years that went by, the sacrifices made, and the man behind the legend. This is the untold truth behind Clint Eastwood's final act. The story of a man who built an empire, and the emotional cost of everything he left behind. Clint Eastwood's story begins long before the Hollywood fame and the bright lights. Born during the Great Depression, he learned early the value of work and discipline. His parents struggled to make ends meet, moving from town to town in search of stability. Clint was never handed anything. Every success he achieved was built with his own two hands. That quiet resilience became the foundation of his life. When he arrived in Hollywood in the early 1950s, he was just another face in a sea of hopefuls. Tall, soft-spoken, and reserved, he didn't fit the mold of the flashy, charismatic leading man studios wanted. But Clint had something different, a raw authenticity that couldn't be faked. It took years of rejection and minor TV roles before he got his big break in Rawhide. The role turned him into a television star, but it was his partnership with Sergio Leone in the spaghetti westerns that transformed him into a legend. As the man with no name, Clint Eastwood gave birth to a new kind of hero, cold, quiet, and unbreakable. His performances captured the loneliness and strength of the American spirit. He was more than an actor. He was a symbol of endurance. Yet behind that rugged image was a man who rarely spoke about his emotions, even to those closest to him. In the decades that followed, Eastwood became one of Hollywood's most powerful figures, not through fame alone, but through control. He created Malpazzo Productions, directed award-winning films like Unforgiven, Mystic River, and $1 Million Baby, and became one of the most successful actor-directors in film history. His sharp business sense turned him into a millionaire many times over, with an estimated net worth that would one day leave his family stunned. But that success came with a cost. Clint's devotion to his craft often left little room for family. With 8 children from multiple relationships, his personal life was as complex as his films. Some of his children would later admit they barely saw their father during his busiest years. Yet none could deny the pride they felt, knowing their father wasn't just a star, but a storyteller who shaped generations. In his later years, as Eastwood began to slow down, his children started to see a different side of him. The stoic figure softened, reflecting more on the past, the mistakes, the achievements, and the fleeting nature of time. His vast fortune, built through decades of relentless work, wasn't just a measure of wealth. It was a symbol of everything he had built, and everything he had sacrificed along the way. Now, as his life's work and estate stand as monuments to his legacy, his family looks back with tears not of greed, but of gratitude and awe. Clint Eastwood didn't just leave behind a fortune. He left behind a life story written in film, love, and silence. By the time Clint Eastwood reached his 70s, he wasn't just an actor, he was an institution. His name had become synonymous with excellence, and his influence stretched far beyond Hollywood. While others his age were retiring, Clint was still working, directing, producing, and building a legacy that would outlive him. Every film he made was a piece of himself, disciplined, restrained, but deeply human. And quietly, behind the scenes, Eastwood was building something else, an empire. Unlike most of his peers, Clint Eastwood never relied on extravagant lifestyles or risky investments. He was famously frugal, preferring simple living over celebrity luxury. While other stars bought private islands or sports teams, Clint invested in real estate, film production, and business ventures that would grow for decades. His company, Malpaso Productions, gave him full control over his movies, meaning that every hit, from Gran Torino to American Sniper, poured directly into his personal fortune. His net worth would eventually climb into the hundreds of millions. But what makes Clint's wealth remarkable isn't the number, it's what it represents. Every dollar was built from decades of work, from the long days on set, the sleepless nights editing, and the endless pursuit of perfection. Eastwood didn't inherit his success. He earned it, one frame at a time, but money was never his motivation. Friends and colleagues often described him as stoic and grounded. He didn't care for awards or possessions. He cared about doing it right. Yet as he grew older, his family began to understand the emotional cost behind that discipline. He missed birthdays, milestones, and years that could never be reclaimed. While his films inspired millions, his own children sometimes watched from a distance, waiting for a father who was always working. Clint Eastwood's relationships with his children were complex, but filled with quiet love. He never flaunted his wealth or status. Instead, he lived modestly, often dining in small California restaurants or walking alone along the Carmel beach where he once served as mayor. His children would later say that what moved them most wasn't the size of his fortune, but the humility of the man who earned it. As the years went on, the family began to grasp just how vast Clint's empire had become. Multiple homes across California, ranches, film royalties, and investments that continued to grow even in his absence. But with that realization came tears, not of greed, but of understanding. They saw that this immense fortune wasn't built to flaunt. It was built to last. It was a monument to the life of a man who gave everything to his craft, often at the expense of himself. When discussions of his estate began to surface, Clint's family reportedly grew emotional, not over inheritance, but over legacy. His success was never about money, and that's what made it so powerful. His children often spoke about his unmatched work ethic, his loyalty, and his ability to stay grounded despite fame that could have consumed anyone else. To them, Clint's wealth wasn't just material, it was emotional. It was the product of decades of sacrifice, love buried beneath silence, and a relentless pursuit of excellence. In the end, the empire Clint Eastwood built wasn't made of gold or glory. It was made of determination, self-reliance, and the unspoken truth that greatness always comes at a price. As Clint Eastwood entered his later years, the man who once embodied strength, silence, and independence began to reveal something far deeper: vulnerability. Behind the rugged exterior and sharp eyes was a soul shaped by time, loss, and reflection. He had spent decades building an empire, but now his focus had shifted from power to peace. The camera no longer defined him. His family, his faith in hard work, and his search for meaning did. At 95, Eastwood still carried the same quiet authority that made him famous, but the world around him had slowed. He no longer cared about box office numbers or Hollywood politics. His concern was legacy, not the kind written in contracts or awards, but in the hearts of those who would carry his name. After years of distance and long silences, Clint began reconnecting with his children, mending old wounds and sharing stories that had remained untold. For his family, those moments were more valuable than the fortune he had built. They saw a man who had finally taken off his armor, the stoic cowboy replaced by a father eager to listen, to forgive, and to be forgiven. The man who once conquered the screen with silence now used that silence to reflect. In quiet dinners, long walks, and shared memories, his children finally saw what fame had hidden for decades. A father who had always loved them, even if he didn't always know how to show it. Though his body had grown frail, Clint's mind remained sharp. He continued to direct, occasionally appearing in films not for glory, but for love of the craft. His later works, like Cry Macho, revealed a gentler side, a meditation on age, regret, and redemption. They weren't just films, they were confessions. Each line, each frame, carried pieces of Clint's own journey, the mistakes, the victories, and the quiet acceptance that comes with age. He often spoke of simplicity, saying that success was never about wealth or recognition, but about doing something that mattered. "You just have to keep moving," he once said. "That's the secret. Don't let the old man in." Those words became a mantra for his fans, but for his family they carried a deeper meaning. They saw a man who refused to be defeated by time, who found purpose even in stillness. In those final years, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, Clint Eastwood's legacy transformed from cinematic to personal. The once distant father became the storyteller of his own life, passing down wisdom, humor, and hard-earned truths. He spoke not of money or fame, but of character, the kind that can't be bought or taught. And that's what made his family cry. Not the size of his fortune, but the realization that behind every dollar, every film, and every moment of fame was a man who gave everything he had. His empire wasn't built on greed. It was built on passion, persistence, and quiet sacrifice. Clint Eastwood, the man who once stood alone on dusty movie sets, now stood surrounded by those who loved him most. His story had come full circle. The cowboy had finally come home. As time caught up to Clint Eastwood, the world watched with quiet reverence. He had outlived many of his peers, defied the odds, and remained a symbol of endurance. But even legends cannot outrun the passage of time. The once unstoppable force of nature began to slow down, his steps measured, his voice softer. Yet even in the twilight of his life, Eastwood refused pity. He faced aging the same way he faced every challenge, with grit, dignity, and grace. Those close to him noticed a shift in his priorities. Hollywood had long been his battleground, but now his gaze turned inward, toward peace, gratitude, and family. His days were no longer filled with scripts and sets, but with long mornings, overlooking the California coast, where he often sat in silence, sipping coffee, lost in thought. He spoke less, but when he did, his words carried the weight of a lifetime. The man who once embodied the lone gunman now found comfort in companionship, from his children, his longtime partner, and even old friends who had stood by him through decades of fame and solitude. He was not a man of sentimentality, but those around him could see the emotion in his eyes when he spoke of his life's journey. "I've done everything I wanted," he once said quietly. "Now, I just want peace." In those final months, Eastwood began putting his affairs in order, not because he feared death, but because he wanted to leave clarity and comfort for the people he loved. His estate, rumored to be worth hundreds of millions, was divided not as a symbol of wealth, but as a gesture of love. He wanted each member of his family to feel seen and valued. "Money comes and goes," he told a friend, "but what you leave in people's hearts, that's forever." When the day finally came, it was quiet, fitting for a man who had always preferred silence to spectacle. News spread quickly. Clint Eastwood had passed away peacefully at home, surrounded by family. The world mourned, but his family mourned differently. For them, it wasn't just the loss of a movie legend, it was the loss of their father, their protector, their storyteller. At his private memorial, there were no flashing cameras or long speeches. Instead, those closest to him shared stories, moments of laughter, lessons learned, and the rare glimpses of softness that few had ever seen. His children spoke of a man who taught them to stand tall, work hard, and never compromise their integrity. One of them said through tears, "He was our rock, quiet, strong, and always there, even when he didn't say a word." As fans around the world revisited his greatest films, Gran Torino, Unforgiven, $1 Million Baby, they realized those weren't just stories. They were reflections of Clint himself. Every line, every stare, every silence carried a piece of his truth. He didn't just play strong men, he was one. In the end, Clint Eastwood's greatest legacy wasn't the awards, the fame, or even the fortune that made headlines. It was his unwavering authenticity, his refusal to be anything but himself. He lived by his own code, and in doing so, inspired generations to do the same. As the sun set over Carmel, where Clint spent his final years, a quiet wind moved through the trees, as if nature itself was tipping its hat to the last cowboy. And though his family wept, they found comfort in knowing he had lived exactly the way he wanted, on his terms, without regret. Clint Eastwood may have ridden into the sunset for the last time, but his spirit, that fearless, unshakable spirit, will never fade. Because legends don't die, they simply ride on.